If you love classic cars, then Donald loves you. Please make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit the bell icon to turn on your notifications, so that way you won't miss any of our widely varied video programs, including those with me and my friend Jay Leno. Also, follow us on Instagram at Audrain Auto Museum and Audrain Motorsport. Hello, and welcome to the Audrain Museum Network, and this presentation, What Defines Character in Great Design? A Designer's Look at the Nick Begovich Collection. And I'm very pleased to be joined here by my friend Michael Simcoe, GM Vice President of Global Design, only the 7th holder of that great title, that amazing title, who is with us from Detroit, Michigan. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Donald. How are you doing?
I am doing quite well. Thank you very much. It is a wonderful thing that we were able to do these virtual seminars, because getting around the country on airplanes through snowstorms is not always a great deal of fun. And we're able to do this in a time frame that suits everyone and everyone's needs. And to be able to get your perspective on what it was and what it is about these cars in this collection that makes them either stand out in terms of their design or in ways makes their design sort of ancillary to the engineering story that's being told. Nick Begovich was somebody who was obviously passionate about engineering and engineering design solutions, but he was also very driven by the aesthetic. And so we'll talk about that a bit and how that changed over the years of the cars that he collected. But first, I want to start with something that is not directly related to Nick Begovich, but I think it's something that Nick would have been greatly interested in, since obviously technology was his life. Recently, General Motors announced an intense program of investment towards the electrification of the light truck fleet. And that's something which obviously means a great deal. It's the largest part of the market. And I wanted to get, for our viewers, some of your thoughts on how that is reflected in design and what this electrification push really means for General Motors.
Yeah, that's a nice connection between the two, but anyway, we'll go there. EV represents, or electrification represents, probably 90% of the work that's happening in the studios right now. This is in some ways a renaissance of design across the world, and you can see it's changing vehicles and changing what we do and how we power vehicles exponentially. It was a slow start, but now it's a full run. As you said, trucks are the heart of the market here in North America, and therefore they're a natural, because one of the things we want to do, obviously, is get volume, get a volume segment, and get moving on a product that has mass appeal and obviously fits the market where the market is right now. And in North America, it's trucks. Trucks of almost the ubiquitous family sedan or wagon of the past. I mean, that's how they're being used. They're tools of trade, but they're also family vehicles as much. And EV, that allows us to, when we do it the way we have, as a dedicated architecture, that allows us to do a little bit more than we perhaps would be able to do in a frame truck. We obviously have the structure of the battery and the truck sits on top, but we also have we're able to do what we do with a unitary body and have if you like, the second row bulkhead into the box is openable, and so you have a very fascinating vehicle because it has multiple uses. And again, we're trying to attract customers who perhaps are traditional truck customers today and want to look at EV, or alternately, those who perhaps shied away from trucks in the past because of what they represented, with a bit more flexibility and I guess the no guilt that EV offers. We're hoping that we'll grow our customer base rather than EV being a special market.
Well, it's very interesting too, Michael. I know that when we first met, and we were looking at the LA Auto Show at the Chevy Bolt, and it's very interesting that sort of in the first generation of EV design, there was a conscious effort to make the electric vehicles look different than the internal combustion vehicles. And will we see now with the truck market a sort of normalization, as it were, of design, or are there additional opportunities with electric design, as you just began to mention, that might filter across other types of lines?
Short of the battery, the bulk of the battery, which is related to power density and all the rest, there's very little restriction. And with the Silverado, we actually, because it's a simpler package, we're able to push all of the occupants forward. So we still have we have no motor in the front end. No gas motor in the front end. So we have storage space there. We have the customers, all of the occupants move forward. So we actually have a bigger second row seat than we would on a gas truck because of the way we're able to manipulate the architecture. And also a massive bed. So it allows us both, whether it's truck or whether it's performance or anything between, we can manipulate the architecture just a little bit differently. And as long as we're copacetic with the battery, because that's the thing we protect, everything else is relatively simple. So it does offer a lot.
It's very interesting, again, going back to Nick Begovich and the idea of how engineering solutions are reflected in design and how design reflects the engineering solution. That offers up some really interesting possibilities. And I will have to say that as somebody who is generally a car customer, I've had one pickup truck in my life, which I bought to tow my vintage race car. And when I sold my vintage race car, the truck went along with it. But I can see your point of how the light truck, especially, I mean, it's become the family car. Mm-hmm. And there are certainly a generation of drivers. I remember speaking with a young man not long ago, and he's talking about the passing of cars along out of the marketplace. And he mentioned all the cars that he really loved driving, and everything that he had mentioned was actually a truck or an SUV. So he had actually never driven a car. So
well, there's still a place for cars, and sedans. It's interesting. Sedans or sedan forms have effectively become premium vehicles in many ways, and the ubiquitous transport is now the realm of the SUV, the small SUV. But that's, I mean, you know how the market cycles, and we're about to look at a little bit of that. But the market cycles a lot. Trucks are in our lives. Sedans are not dead, despite what media says. And what will happen is EV will allow alternative packaging solutions, and in some ways discovering what customers do like, and then chasing that. That's what the designers and that's what the market have always done. Look for the white space. Look for the thing that's moving, or alternately create it. The truck we've done is styled. The brief to the studio was do a sports car, don't do a truck. I mean,
that's quite interesting.
And realistically, and you can see that in the surfaces, and that was all part of defining a different non-traditional truck customer. It'll be interesting to see how that works. But it is a dedicated architecture, deliberately designed as to satisfy the needs of a truck customer, but also grow that appeal.
Well, it's terrific that we'll have a great deal to look forward to in these new vehicles, because I certainly know you and I have had this conversation before. Looking at some of the great designs, some of which we're going to see today, that the role of the designer has really obviously changed a great deal. The age of sitting down at a drawing board and just sort of sketching out something that you captured from a napkin and realizing it in hand-beaten aluminum is slightly behind us. But nevertheless, it's good to hear that there are still opportunities for expression in design.
Well, the one thing that is real here. What we do is create vehicles that are physical presences out there in the community. People have to react to them viscerally, even if it's a negative reaction. It's still a reaction. And so in the studios, we still create full-size models. We use all of the virtual tricks to get ourselves through to the final thing that validates the design. That's the model. models at present, because it's a very, very emotional game. It's the ideal mix of the rational versus the craft, and the craft is still strong.
And it's so great to hear you say that, because, of course, for me personally, and we here at the Audrain, we're all about that personal connection that people have with vehicles, and the fact that, as I've often said and will continue to say, that everyone is a car or vehicle person. There's some of us who identify as enthusiasts, but everybody's connected with a car.
Yeah, so. Yeah. You mentioned before, we could probably get into this now. I mean, the next collection was obviously fascinating, and with at a personal level, with one or two ads, would be the ultimate collection from that early 50s post-war all the way through into the 70s. I'd add one or two vehicles, but we won't talk about those. Just personal favourites. But when you start with the Jaguar. I mean, it's beautiful. It's a European style, in some ways, a development of pre-war, because it was happening inside a Europe that had been devastated, and it comes back. It's very British in its form. It's that European aerodynamics coming through. This is a nice, or my preferred expression, because it doesn't have the spat over the rear wheel, which talked to aerodynamics.
It's so funny, because my favorite, I love the XK120 fixed head. My favorite one is with disc wheels and spat.
Oh, well, there's the first point. There's the first point of difference. The reason I like it, I think it's to me, with the spat, the rear corner of the car is quite heavy. And it's relatively tall, and a bit of a lump of a car. But when you get up close and you look down, if you like, down the fuselage of the vehicle, through the grille, and then down the centre of the vehicle, to me that's where the magic is. It's got the graphic form, the lift over the rear wheel, but the reality for me is that the centre of the car is doing all the work. And there was, interestingly, in '53 they did, I believe, some sort of speed attempt with the vehicle, where they took the top off, they took all of the traditional glass up, and they put almost the Spitfire bubble or the P51 bubble on top to go fast, with a tonneau on one side. And that, to me, is the expression of the car. It is this low fuselage with a pontoon either side to support the wheels and tyres. Oh, there you go. Beautiful car. And to think that Lyons stood there and directed someone for a couple of weeks who was beating aluminum to create the car is staggering. Traditionally, back then, they were done with small timber scale models.
But yes, and it's also it's quite wonderful. Thinking about too, I'm a big fan of the pre-war aerodynamic designs, and this is sort of the ultimate expression of that pre-war aerodynamic design in a post-war, very fresh post-war feel. And also added to that, the performance of these cars, in 1948, 1949, 1950 was astonishing for passenger cars of a reasonable price.
No, it's a beautiful car. No, the dark wires are beautiful too. I mean, it's just a lovely combination. Anyway, so then you step into the next one in the list of the cars, the Talbot, the GSL, which I think, from memory, was the last Talbot logo that was done. I think it was the last entry in a company that was in trouble.
It's sort of the next to last. They did a smaller engine car in a vain attempt to save the company, but it's
that's the story quite often through history. Again, a lovely car, but in some ways, it's funny. I somehow feel that it's less modern than the Jaguar, because it feels heavier. You can see it in that view just then. the details, the grille and the headlamps are small in the volume of the vehicle. It's to me that body side is very heavy. Interesting little, I feel like a little wind split on the rear quarter there. Yeah, and I believe the rear glass, being Europe at the time, didn't have the capability. The rear glass is actually Perspex to get that wraparound rear corner.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean
And
a
one of the
lovely
other
car and beautifully proportioned, but somewhat traditional, I think.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that this particular car, the GSL, is a very rare example. It is one of only 15 built, and the only one with a 4-speed manual gearbox. We're not quite sure why. Perhaps it was designed for rallying. That never happened. But you're absolutely correct in I agree with you. I should say you're absolutely correct because you're always right. You're brilliant. But
No.
I agree with you on the forms. It's very interesting that the Talbot and the Jaguar being contemporary. The Jaguar, they have comparable performance, but the Talbot looks like some sort of very sedate grand touring car when it's in fact quite fast and very powerful. And it also tells a very interesting story about Nick Begovich's collection, and collecting, I should say, because he wanted one of the pre-war teardrop coupes, again going back to that style of the XA120, and he was unable to find one, and on a trip to Europe, he was told about this car, and he was in France, and he bought the car, and in a wonderful case of sort of buyer's remorse, he picked up the car at the dock in Los Angeles, drove it back home to Fullerton, and basically parked it. He never drove it again because it was just not the car that he actually wanted, which is an object lesson in being patient and sticking to your guns and not settling.
Yeah. But it comes across as I mean, beautifully European, traditional proportion, and the dash tracks is wonderful on the car, and it's clearly a Grand Tourer. There's no question about that, and feels rich in the way it's executed, but very, very simple. And the grille, I'm not sure that the grille works necessarily. I think, as I said at the start, I think for the power of the car, it doesn't say enough. It's very simple, and the grille almost looks like a carryover of Talbots from the past.
Yes, I think that there was this idea that they were going to somehow deliver their past glory in a post-war age, and it comes across as somewhat of an afterthought. That there could have been sort of a very low, open mouth kind of a grille with an egg crate finish or something that would have been more in keeping with the character of the car.
Yeah, yeah. Well, when you see, just hinted on the side of this image on the left-hand side, what was almost a contemporary, that little speedster, and you think how different the two vehicles are, and their purpose as sports cars was similar, but the execution and the way that, I think it's like the thinking behind the cars is quite staggering. So we go to the Porsche next, the Speedster. There are so many people who've written so much and talked so much about this particular vehicle. Again, it's a new interpretation in Europe of aerodynamics, and if you go to the Porsche Museum or frankly, if you go to the Mercedes Museum and you see the pre-war and post-war aerodynamic studies that were being done, this fits right in there. Beautifully simple car, almost without adornment, because the form is so simple. It talks to lightness, simplicity in engineering as well as execution, but lightness and efficiency is there in a way that perhaps only Germany could have pulled off. Beautiful vehicle, and as a consequence, is if you collecting cars in this period, this is one you want. The impossibly low windscreen on the Roadster is wonderful too. It's,
Yes, as long as you're not sitting underneath the top when it's up.
Yeah. Yes, yeah. But the space inside the vehicle, I've only driven one once, and I was staggered by how open the cockpit is. But how lean the car feels. And you see that every line is without adornment. The forms are really, really subtle.
A word that I'm fond of overusing, and if I was in your world, I certainly would be probably branded for doing it, is elemental.
Yeah.
You know, the car is elemental. There's nothing there that doesn't do something.
Yeah.
Even the side trim seems to be there for theoretical body protection, but it's simply adornment.
Yeah.
But you know, it's one of those things too that, as you would well know and can, I think, express quite well, one of the things that Nick Begovich was very drawn to because of his great admiration of Hans Ledwinka, the great designer of Tatras, were to mid-engine and rear-engined cars. And there's a particular challenge, I would imagine, in designing a rear-engine, and we'll get to mid-engine cars in a moment, car that doesn't look very heavy in the rear, especially for a car like this, because you know, it is so low, and at the risk of starting a bit of a war with great fans of them, the later Porsche 911 sort of speedster revivals, for me, don't work because they are so incredibly tall in the back.
Yeah. And this is again the beauty of this car is that the wheels are accessories. I mean, they're not part of the form at all. And that was commonplace, but in this, it doesn't take anything away. They suit the vehicle beautifully. It's overbodied, and it's all the things that a designer would hate to deliver today, but it works beautifully well. And it's like stronger, lighter, simpler sort of thing. It's a beautiful execution of a car, but built for purpose.
Let me ask you this question, Michael. One of the things that people frequently note on the car, you mentioned the fact that it appears to be vastly under-tired, and especially because the track is so narrow versus the width of the body. Now, was that something that was done specifically by the Porsche designers for an aerodynamic point of view, so that the wheels were completely out of the way from the aerodynamic element, or was it just done for a larger passenger compartment? And
no, without knowing the answer, it looks like aerodynamics. Just a simple form, clearing the guards, and one thing that Air likes to do is move around a very soft corner, and you can see that in the plan view into the front wheel arch and then down the body side. It's classic. Obviously not something that we'd like to do today, but beautiful nevertheless.
Well, we also need to touch on, because it's part of the conversation that we've been having before, about how tastes and styles and trends also change. What was acceptable back in the late 40s and early 50s in terms of proportion of body, wheel, track, tires looked completely odd to us today. Although some of that has come back with some of the smaller cars where they've gone to a narrower tire for fuel economy reasons, but we're just so used to seeing very fat tires on cars today that anything that's not a fat tire just seems odd to us.
Yeah, for designers, it's these days, and for some time, it's been more about diameter. Using longer the wheelbase, taller the cowl, larger the wheel, just to keep the thing, or keep the overall proportion working. So there's I don't know if there's any rules about proportion, but tire and wheel size are used to soak up some of the physics that we now have to deal with. Is probably the nicest way of putting it. describing how we have to deal with vehicles today. I don't believe, because we'll talk about it in the next one as well, the Gullwing. I don't believe that Porsche was designed to satisfy a style trend or a market trend or anything like that. It was designed purely as a functional vehicle, a functional sports car, and that was Dr. Porsche's thing in everything he did. And if you think about when the vehicle was done, and also the next one, which is the Gullwing 300 SL, thinking about when they were done, which is when, again, post-war, Germany was, wouldn't have been a happy place even as late as this. But these two incredible interpretations of German engineering and German efficiency. The Porsche's incredibly efficient, all about lightness and efficiency, and you don't need what you don't need to get the job done, whereas this engineering monster, it's staggering. When you get up close, and I like mechanisms, and I like architectural pieces, and I like the engines and things. So spending time with a vehicle like this is just amazing. It's just an engineering tour de force, and you can see that in the styling of the vehicle as well. Again, a vehicle built for purpose. This came from the race car, and a tube frame chassis, which obviously to get the structure lifted the sills, and therefore the gullwing door was put in to allow people to get in the vehicle in a relatively refined way.
Getting out of the vehicle is a totally different thing, but
yeah. But the power that the car has, and again it's aerodynamics coming in here, and even the strokes or the forms above the wheel arches were all about controlling air down the side of the vehicle. But just powerful. I actually prefer the Roadster. Again, I prefer the simple side view, rather than the upper, which is sort of planted. And so I love the vehicle, but I like the simpler form of the Roadster. And when you think about the things like the big cast bulkhead and the tube frame, the tube frame that supports the vehicle, and then everything else that the vehicle is capable of, huge speeds, huge power. It's Germany.
To your point also about going back to the Talbot, the fact that this car looks like it's a very high performance GT car in a way that the Talbot doesn't. The Talbot sort of hides its capabilities beneath a very sober skin, and this, again, going back, I think it harkens back to the pre-war. If you look at the pre-war streamliners of Mercedes and Auto Union, you get very much, again, sort of the final version of this in these cars. And also, now that you mentioned the grille on the Talbot, if the Talbot had a grille like the Mercedes grille, it would actually have been so much more interesting. This vehicle, you walk around it, it's beautifully proportioned. It's so well done. It was done again recently. I mean, if anything, the most recent reinterpretation of it almost exaggerates what this car has, which is the longer dash to axle, the even more powerful grille, and it's a front engine vehicle. There's no mistake when we're pushing the occupants way back in the vehicle. Right.
But a beautiful, simple form. But there's not one thing on it which is adornment for adornment's sake. It's about doing a job, and it's Germany showing its engineering might.
Well, the funniest thing about this is that I have conversations on occasion with people about sort of automotive bling and my general distaste for it. And the one thing about this car that is quite interesting, again, thinking of its time, the mid-1950s, that star in the grille is awfully big. It's like, Mercedes! That could go on the top of their headquarters building. I mean, it's an amazing thing to think that they actually sort of did that.
Yeah. Well, if you ever, I mean, if any of the people who'll see this ever get a chance, they should visit the Mercedes Museum because it has an interpretation of vehicles and the designs and the time that they were produced in and what was around them. It's a beautiful museum. You do get the sense, though, without offending anyone, a sense that Mercedes almost believes that they created the horse and then it became the car. I mean, you go up in an elevator and you start at the top of the museum, you walk down, but the first thing that I certainly saw when I walked out was the horse, and that gave me a message.
Exactly.
But the aerodynamic studies that are in there, you can see where this car came from, and rightly termed these days as the first supercar, and has that sort of presence, and again, very very collectible and very desirable because of that, and sits well in this collection. That Nick was all about passion and engineering and styling, and I guess what they did for each other. But I just for a second go back to the Jaguar, the Talbot, and then think about the Porsche and the Mercedes and what they were saying about what was happening in Europe, and I guess the impact. The France and England, the cars are in some ways more austere, and interestingly, in Germany, in my mind, that those two vehicles are more flamboyant, more expressive of Germany and Germany's power in engineering and execution. Without getting too political.
Well, again, it's a very, very interesting place, the post-war European scene, because of all sorts of nationalist interests and tastes, and in a good way. I mean, it's something that is always a part of the conversation about the national characteristics of cars, and I think that it's something that we'll continue to see here in this group of cars, and I want to touch on that after we go through these guys. I want to touch on that a bit with you as well, sort of the internationalization of design and what that has meant for cars. Where would you like to go next?
Well, I think the next on the list chronologically is the Chevy Corvair, the Monza Spider Club Coupe, which is a mouthful. But the Corvair is one that's close to the heart because it's obviously a Chevy vehicle, and at the time it was created, it was a bit of a design revolution, and as one of the things that came out of it is that horizontal line at the shoulder that runs all the way around the vehicle is called the Corvair line, and you see it. Interestingly, you see it in the cars beyond that were styled both in North America and in Europe, and frankly everywhere that cars were being designed and executed in the world for the next decade or so, had an interpretation of this line, which is really interesting. And GM had been playing with that feature, that if you're like a chine line on a boat that runs right round the form, and I think it might harken back to some of the Disco Volante studies that were being done, the aero studies that were coming out of Italy way back in the 50s, and influenced Mitchell and the Stingray and other vehicles. So this was I think a beautiful execution, interestingly simple like Europeans at the time, but then ridiculously or not, was an influence on post European vehicles. That body side is one of the performance vehicles, drive to excite you vehicles or brands in Europe right now has lived off this body side for some time. The later interpretation of the Corvair took it, instead of the bounce over the lamps, they took it straight across and actually gave it a bit more edge, but the original is still beautiful.
And it's also, of course, as I believe you know, Corvairs are very close to my heart. My very first car was a 1963 Corvair Monza convertible. And I love the style of the Club Coupe. Again, basically, although I've had convertibles, I'm a coupe guy. I mean, I like closed forms.
Yep.
I like what they do. And this particular car also represents a time when General Motors was being very adventurous in terms of its engineering.
Yeah.
The fact that they're offering this turbocharged model on a very high volume car. This is not some small production specialist car, and it is something that I think really speaks a great deal. This car was originally Nick Begovich's wife's Joan's car. She's a high school teacher, and so clearly she enjoyed cars as well. Yeah. She could have gotten a 700 four-door sedan, but no, she didn't.
Yeah. Well, to your point about the being a bit of a revolution, it was a styling revolution, if you like, but also, I guess at being pushed by Ed Cole, it represented, to your point, a real engineering shift. It was a unitary body, which was certainly not the first of its kind, but almost unique in this period, where cars had the integrated subframe in the front end, and some still were body on frame, and the form of the vehicle has that monocoque feel about it in its style and its weight. The impossibly thin pillars. Oh, I love them. the upper floats rather than as part of the vehicle, and it has some adornment, but it's not sort of ladled on. It is quite restrained, both exterior and interior, fairly restrained compared to what, again, its contemporary vehicles, whether they were Chevrolets, Olds, or Pontiacs, whatever. But the car is beautiful. I dislike the wheel. I dislike the wheel covers in 10. Yeah, the wheels are horrid, but they're the one piece I would remove. But the car is so simple and so elegant. And
yes, in 1960, to think about what was on the road, to see a form like this, again, was quite marvelous. And to run a Corvair, a first-generation Corvair, on a set of Barani wire wheels would be quite wonderful.
So, but this is, when you see the car live, you don't understand from the images how small it is, and almost light and petite in its execution, which again is very different for what was happening around it, not just in GM, but also all the other brands here in North America.
Absolutely, an import fighter that actually had the same philosophy of the imports as opposed to being a shrunken full-size or intermediate car.
And with such a such a promise, but sort of ignominious end. It's unfortunately, and by the time the car or the car had recovered, it was too late. Mustang was around, and but I guess first of the. I should say this, but probably in my mind, first of the true modern sports cars here in North America, which were overcome by Mustang ultimately, and
you're absolutely correct.
Sports cars went off in a different direction.
Right. Yeah. And America does have a long history, and again, Chevrolet is one of those brands that has bucked the trend of starting out with sports cars that end up as luxury sedans somehow.
Yes, yeah.
But everything wanders.
Yeah, but it's a lovely car. It's that would be a high on most designers' bucket lists.
Now we get into a very interesting area, I'm sure. What is your next?
Yes, the Alfa Romeo, the Giulia Sprint Speciale.
Yes.
Yes, the Bertone did their job. Again, this is a later one from memory, and I think it has the higher nose.
Yes.
But again, Italian aerodynamics. I'm not sure whether they necessarily work, but again, I think this harks back to some of the aero work that you saw in the Disco Volante and also the Bats.
Yes.
In that period. Highly stylized, but again, very, very simple. And if you see it in side view, it gets even better. Again, just lose the upper and just study the body side and the general form of the fuselage of the vehicle.
Well, one of the things that I also love about the upper part of this, though, is the fact that all the glass, the windshield and the rear glass, just curve in a ridiculous way. It's really a bat for the road, although the original bats were all drivable cars. But it was an interesting thing that you talk about the aerodynamics. They made a very big deal, Bertone and Scaglione made a very big deal of the coefficient of drag of Bat 5 and Bat 7. They never actually released the figures for Bat 9, the most production-ready of the cars, and the car upon which this is largely based. And when they released it as a competitor, theoretically, for the Giulietta Zagato racing coupes, it, of course, wasn't actually faster than the standard coupe. So, but it looked great. So,
yeah, and it's again in contemporary form. It talked to aerodynamics because it was so clean and efficient, and things we know now are quite different to what was understood necessarily back then. Because aerodynamics had been around for a while, but it was still a science. The original car had no bumpers, and that's interesting because you can actually then see how tapered that lower form is, and when the nose is even lower, this side view is just simply almost a dart that swells to the centre and then tapers again, both in plan view and side view. It's beautiful car.
Absolutely tremendous. And next up, do we go?
We'll go Porsche. We'll go back to Germany again. and speaking of the last two, this is once again I guess designed as a race car and nothing else.
Yes.
Porsche moving into a homologation vehicle, fiberglass body and simple framed chassis. Just very, very simple, and interestingly, very, very different to the 911, in which is what people ubiquitously see as Porsche. But I think Porsche to me is starting with this and working all the way through until it eventually became the 917. It was that's the Porsche I like. Absolutely the racing domination that they represented. And I think this. Again, I don't know you. You probably know more than I do, Donald. But this car, I think, probably did better here in North America than it possibly did in Europe. It was picked up by a lot of people to race here in various forms.
It did fairly well on both sides of the ocean in endurance racing as well as circuit races and hill climbs in Europe. It was really a hill climb car. One of the things that sort of limited its success in Europe was the fact that Porsche fairly quickly replaced it with the Carrera 6, the 906, for a variety of reasons. A lot of them to do with the way the 904's body was built, which was very experimental and not terribly successful. But nonetheless, it was really quite something because it represented a completely new design language for Porsches. That's for sure. It was nothing like the 356 and introduced concurrently with the 911. There are people that wish that they had done sort of as a performance halo car a Strassen version of this car. Although of course for Nick Begovich, he never raced this car. He only ever intended to use it as a street car, and its only use has been on the street. And it's a thoroughly streetable car. Probably again that last moment when a successful sports racing car could actually be used on the street without too much pain.
Yeah. But you can, if you look hard at the image that's on the screen right now, you can very quickly see a 911 in the vehicle. But with all of the the giveaway to the fiberglass body, which is unfortunate. Because it was the early days of glass.
And Porsche's first fiberglass
Yeah,
car.
yeah, yeah.
And so they learned a lot very quickly. Their learning curve was high.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
That's
And
for
it's
sure.
and it feels a little bit like the next one, which is a little bit like the Telbo, a company that wasn't going to last for very much longer. Where are we? The ATS, the 2500. Again, this is the alloy-bodied form, I think, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. There was I think the earlier version or the other version, because there weren't that many, I believe, had bumpers and a bit more adornment.
They're built between.
This was the cleaner car.
Exactly.
Yeah. Go on.
It is very interesting. I mean, obviously this and the 904 are contemporaries. They're sports racing cars, largely designed for the same brief, although ATS made a street version of this with the bumpers and a fully upholstered interior and engine cover and all those things that you want to have in a GT car. And it's quite interesting that Nick Begovich had both these cars because they're very sort of different approaches to the same problem. And, for me, again, thinking about national characteristics, you talked about the Speedster and 300 SL being very much sort of products of their use. This is what they're designed to do. They have nothing else that they don't need to execute their mission. And the 904 is that as well in 1964, and the ATS, even though it's a racing car, still has the sort of elegance of line and detail that the Italians had to put into everything.
Yes, you have to look good while you're doing anything you're doing. There's no question about that. But you can see the heritage of the car, though. Was it Bazzarini and Chitti were
Carlo Chitti.
Yeah,
yes.
they were Ferrari or ex-Ferrari, and I'm guessing they wanted to take what they'd done with the 250 and beat Ferrari with a stick in this form. And it was Scaglione did the body, and you can see through the body side the heritage of Ferrari and the character of the front end as well, but done in a little bit different. But it still has a Ferrari feel to it, which is understandable. A company that didn't last long, and I don't know the number, but there weren't many of these created, I don't believe. So this is a rare,
generally
piece.
about 10.
Oh.
Generally about 10, and there are three of these alloy cars.
Yeah, beautiful
So,
car. And if you have an image that spins it around to the rear,
I don't.
If you get a chance to, and you want to spend some time looking at this car in detail, then have a look at its rear three-quarter view, and it seems impossibly soft and low in the rear. Recognizing it was, but it has a calm tail, so it still has all that power back there. Just look at the body side.
Yeah, it's an amazing car, and I don't like to choose favorites. However, this is my favorite. We were talking about wheels before. Can you imagine these lovely wheels on my '62 Corvair? Yes. That would be quite marvelous.
That'd be better. Yes.
Yeah.
No, it's again, it's a lovely car. It's quite a thick body side, but you don't see any of that. To me, you read the centre line of the vehicle. You read the shoulder through the front and rear fender and across the offset to the upper. And unlike what I'd said in previous cars, the upper works on this car. It's part of that centre line that works really, really well. Beautifully integrated, and that soft shoulder into the rear and the wraparound glass. Beautiful.
Yes, extraordinary. Glad we agree on that, Mike.
Yes. All right, next one is Miura. Speaking of a hammer.
Yes.
This is, again, it's an odd car because it plays with dash to axle almost the way a front engine car does. But to make it all work, there's a horizontally opposed engine in the rear on a transaxle. It's a beautiful car, Gandini's work. And to me, Lamborghini always sort of were stepping out differently to most of the other Italians. And I'm staggered by the fact that, within a couple of years, Lamborghini did the Countach. and to go for two impossible ends of the spectrum is quite spectacular. And if nothing else, Gandini was a master for that. It's incredibly 60s, this car, to me. Back into the 60s, but very 60s in the detailing, the black, very fine, very technical detailing on the car. The whiskers on the headlamps, that rear louver, and the rear louver that quickly appeared on as an accessory on every sports car. Yeah, but look at that. Powerful, simple, beautiful car, and to me,
it is remarkable.
It is more artistic than the Lamborghinis that followed it. And it is. Sorry, go on. You go.
Yeah. It is also so interesting that when you think about the fecundity of design at Lamborghini was sort of ridiculous, and I think slightly the undoing of the company. I mean, they started in 1963, and already by 1970 they had gone through 4 completely different types of cars.
Yeah.
They could have saved some for later, sort of spread it out a bit more. But it's also the fact that you mentioned that one of the things that I find so fascinating about this car is the fact that if you did not know, and of course the entire world knows it's a mid-engine car, but if you did not know that it's a mid-engine car, it could be a flat 12 front-engine car.
Yeah. And
it does not have any of that.
The locale is the only giveaway.
Proportion.
The locale and the intakes on the C-pillar, but in every other respect, it's a more traditional proportion.
And then when you think about what I don't want to get too far afield here, but I just love talking to you about this. When you think about the vents in the C-pillar that Alfa Romeo put on the Montreal, which was a front-engine car, and it was sort of.
Well, this is in that era. I mean, I'm old enough to have grown up in the '60s, and I was in those days obviously down in Australia. And it was a yearly journey to the auto show where the latest Italian masterpiece was put on show, and that was the draw. The Caribou, the Stibulo, all of those vehicles where you and your friends would have a conversation about the overall height of the vehicle, and if it wasn't under 30 inches, they weren't trying. And just a magnificent time, because I think it was flamboyant in a way that we struggle for perhaps today, for lots of reasons.
Yeah, that is one of the things that I think is so striking about this car in particular, Pizzarini, things like that, is how incredibly low they are. It's almost impossible to conceive. When you see this car in the gallery in the museum, not far from the XK120, which is a sleek car, but appears to be about 10 feet tall next to the Miura.
And I think if you don't have to know anything about vehicles or the brand or what this car is, but most people would just say instantly, that's a sports car, that's a supercar. It just has that. And then we move across the ocean. We get to 1970 and the Chevy Camaro SS, the second generation Camaro. And I say that with an Australian accent. I apologise. But
so what are your thoughts here? Because I've got an opinion here which I think might surprise you.
Yeah, no, I think this is the better of the Camaros. I think this again, the stories I've heard is Rubicki put together a lower from Hank Hager and an upper from Bill Porter to create this vehicle, and so Chevrolet on the lower and Buick on the upper. I think and again, the story is that Rubicki believed he'd done a better job, or that the studios had done a better job with this one because the first one was rushed, because it was in some ways a reaction. Although the Camaro had been a thought for many, many years, it didn't get a lot of steam until the other shop did their piece with the Mustang. But this car, I think I prefer it to the first generation.
As do I. I think it's one of the most beautiful GM cars of the period, and especially to see it in this form without a vinyl top, which is also quite wonderful.
Yeah, and the if you extended that the D line or the DLO, the side glass and the upper there, and the wraparound rear glass, then there's a hint of Lusso in there.
Yes.
And I believe there was a Lusso floating around at the time here in GM design. But again, the very simple that brake line, which it means that the whole lower body side goes into shadow, and so you just see the shoulder. The shoulder's really simple. There's no complication of having a stick. There's just simply the side glass and no quarter glass. Beautiful. And then the front view also was equally simple with the grille split. Again, the earlier interpretations, I think, were even in the second generation, were my preference.
And this is Joan Begovich's last car that she bought new and drove up until the time of her passing. And it's an amazing thing, again, to think about, a high school teacher with this wonderful 300 horsepower V8 Camaro SS350. It's a fabulous car to drive.
And so again, reflect on. Sorry, I'm jumping over you, but reflect on this is a sports car versus the Corvair.
Yes.
And I think you can see where America was moving. It was all about muscle rather than necessarily efficiency or purpose. So.
Correct.
And sorry,
absolutely.
I jumped over the top of you.
No, it delivers its message in a completely different way than the Corvair.
Yeah.
It just immediately brought me back to all the cars that I drove when I first started driving. And again, just an incredibly beautiful shape, and the idea of being able to deliver performance in a way, this may sound really bizarre, we'll talk about this, it reminds me a bit of the Talbot, because it doesn't look like a high-performance car, and yet it is a high-performance car.
Yeah.
It has that aspect of it.
But I think that's, yes, proportion played a part in that, but America, it was, performance was almost, sounds crude, but almost bolted on. Bolted on the designs, bolted on the engineering, the mechanics, rather than too many vehicles, Corvette perhaps, that were designed for the purpose of being a high performance sports car.
Yes, that duality of purpose, that going back to the conversation that we started with about trucks.
Yeah.
The duality of purpose is something that I think is not new. Mm-hmm. The idea that you could have high performance in a car that also could sort of putter around town if you needed it to as well, and not be so obvious, is something that has been around for a long time. And it's something that is, I think, largely seen in most of the cars in Begovich's collection, because while I think all of them share, and we'll get to the rest of them very shortly, all of them share a certain aesthetic appeal. Very few of the cars that he bought, if any, were cars that sort of screamed in your face, I am this.
And this form lasted all the way, it bridged the 60s, because it was obviously designed before 70, and all the way through the late 70s. So it had a long life and remained a pretty car all the way through, which is testament.
Absolutely.
So the last two here, and the 73 and 74, we're back to Italy, but only halfway back with the Pantera. Di Tommaso Pantera. It's a if you like, it's a high-volume supercar, or volume
Yeah,
production supercar. I mean, it's a car that I suppose Italian in its form, very 70s, with a big lump of American iron underneath, which made it a very tractable, very simple car, but very desirable. Lots of power in a very light body, and the profile to me is the stunner here. The profile and that very simple front edge on the leading edge of the hood. All the same things. The body tucked under to lighten the upper that's buried into the profile rather than on top of it. A working vent on the C pillar because to tell you it's rear engine, but the proportion does that as well, obviously. Very in its form as form became a little bit harder, a little bit line driven in the 70s. This car reflects all of that. Tahaj did a really nice job.
It's a terrific car, and of course, also again, like the Corvair, a reaction, Ford's reaction to the Corvette, and the fact that at any moment the Corvette was going to go mid-engined, so they had to be ready.
Yeah, we fixed that.
Exactly. And it again speaks to the fact that a solution, a sort of a production-based solution to this mid-engine engineering problem of a sports car really appealed to Nick Begovich. And again, I think that, as you just pointed out, Tom Charter's design says as much to the 70s as the Miura said to the 1960s. And I think that they are both very great exemplars of their periods. You know, the car looks like it's supposed to look. You know.
Yeah, and Nick bought a yellow one because that was the 70s. Yeah, the car looks good.
And
it's not a favourite amongst many people. I'm not that in love. I guess I'll talk about that when I get to the next one too. This 70s form of very line-based. I mean, very sculptural body side, but very line-based design, and almost designed in two dimensions. That profile was very important. The surfaces work, but I'm not a real fan of cars in this period, or this type of car at this period.
It is. I'm wearing something very appropriate for driving. So
yes, of course.
I'm glad that you didn't comment on the fact that I'm wearing today the same jacket that I was wearing when I was driving the Miura.
No, I just thought you had two.
It looks completely different because I don't have a goatee at the moment.
But there's look at that interior. I mean, if there's not a nod to American interiors. This is the car we want to sell in America. Let's throw some things at it. Look at that.
There's also quite a funny Nick Begovich anecdote as regards to that dashboard. He took delivery of his car and he wrote to the De Tomaso distributors in Detroit and said, I just taken delivery of my Pantera, and by the way, the owner's manual description and layout of the controls is completely different than the layout of controls that are actually in the car.
Yeah.
So you probably may want to look at that.
Yeah. Okay.
Which I think is quite marvelous. Not quite something you do today.
Yeah. And the last one was the 74, the Bora, the Maserati. So it's a supercar meets practicality almost. It sort of is my interpretation. Apparently lots of luggage space in the front there, and good ability to get in and out of the vehicle because of the high, the high door rail there. But again, it's a little bit like to me anyway, a little bit like the Pantera. I'm not a fan of this era necessarily. The car feels heavy to me, although live, it's a nice car to walk around, but it's a nice car to walk around up close. I'm not necessarily in love with it when you stand back and look at it. Simplicity, but I don't know. The company was owned by Citroën at the time, so I'm sure that made the car eminently more practical. Don't know whether it helped. I don't know whether it helped with the style. I'm not a real fan of it. Jaguar did much better things, many more times.
It is interesting to see. This car also is one of those cars that sort of deceives. It's much smaller and lower than it appears.
Yeah.
When you're standing next to the car, it's quite low and sleek.
Yeah.
But it is also, I think, a very interesting fusion that Jaguar, of course, would go on to do a lot of the most angular and folded of the folded paper wedge. It's a combination of 1960s curves and 1970s angles.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is sort of an interesting thing, and that sort of, for some strange reason, makes me think it really expresses that sort of Franco-Italian mix somehow.
Yeah, yeah. Albeit, though, as I said, standing away from the car, you start to see the stainless steel roof and the bright rail makes the C pillar, or the B pillar in this case, even taller, and it just, to me, it's never a wasted opportunity, but I'm not sure it's the best of its period.
And also,
probably the nicest way of doing it.
In side view, it proclaims its mid-engined-ness.
Yes.
It could be nothing but a mid-engine car.
yes, and the giveaway is you need to look over your shoulder, but so we'll put a window there. Yeah.
Right.
Anyway,
Exactly.
it's still a lovely car, and like all the vehicles we've talked about in Nick's collection, they represented from the Bora, which is a supercar with practicality, which talks to the period it was done in, and the style is absolute to the period, all the way through back to the Jaguar and Lions and a friend beating sheet metal. It's kind of an interesting mix in it, and through all of that, there's performance with that style. So, magnificent collection.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Michael, for your review of these cars and your thoughts. It's been a fun conversation. I just wanted to end with a couple of questions that were sent in. One particular, in your design process, what inspiration do you take from the Heritage Collection at GM and some of the history, or is it just about current designs and the needed technology?
No. The studios, the branded studios, because they are all branded these days, the designers, particularly the young designers, do need some understanding of the brand heritage. So the Heritage Centre, for that reason, is very, very good. And you don't always see it, but the past is there. If nothing else, it's educating people, the designers, about what the brand should represent and what was good and bad in their history, we don't ignore it, but we don't get trapped by it.
That's a good thing. And what would you tell the 18-year-old kid who aspires to be an automotive designer?
Sketch, and observe. Just look around. Try and understand what you're looking at, and send me an email or write me a letter, and we can help.
Fantastic. And last but not least, what is the biggest challenge in designing an EV?
Being constrained by lack of imagination. I mean, the designers retreat or coverall is that criteria didn't help me, or physics is fighting against me. That to do anything well, you need a balance, and so the vehicle you're designing has to function as well as and look very, very good, and that's again a link back to what Nick's got there. I mean, he's got vehicles that are styled and look beautiful, they look like what they should do, and that style covers engineering purpose, that power, passion, performance, and they do what design is supposed to do. They tell people who see you in your vehicle what you are, who you are. They're an extension of ourselves. It's very visceral. And it's hard to explain that to people until you can walk them past a car that they absolutely love, and you can explain, perhaps, or try and explain why they love it or what they see in it. So it's a great job.
Well, that's
great
fantastic. Thank you very, very
You're
much,
welcome.
Michael, and we are certainly looking forward to seeing you here in Newport for the Concours and Motor Week in September. And I want to thank you again for taking your time and sharing your knowledge and opinions and great spirit with us.
Thanks, Donald. Appreciate it.
So thank you to all in our audience, and we'll see you again in the next video here on the Audrain Museum Network. Thanks a lot.
Bye.